Well, everybody, I would like now to introduce our speaker today. And May is Business Image Improvement Month, and this week is Small Business Week. So, what an excellent way to start our month with Jennifer Hines, who is going to share with us today strategic conversations that convert. So, everyone, let's give Jennifer a hand.
Can I share my screen?
Yes, there you go. You have permission to do it.
All right. Can everybody see that? All right, good. I can put it in slideshow. That might make it easier to see. Give me 1 second. All right. So unfortunately, we've got a short amount of time, and I've tried to prepare more overview for you, but to give you some tactical things that you can implement following this meeting. And I want to begin by saying finding and closing business is tougher than it's ever been. In fact, the days of successfully selling in a who knows who environment are long gone. And I'm sure I don't need to tell you all that. And don't get me wrong, it's the best of the best when you can get somebody that knows you and refers you. Those tend to be the best prospects. But generally speaking, most companies can't wait for those. In other words, you should be actively seeking them, but sitting back and hoping that you're going to get them isn't going to be enough to accelerate your growth. I'm sure I don't need to tell you this, but sales is the oxygen in your business. And whether you happen to be the #1 key salesperson as the owner of your business, or if you have a team of salespeople, what I can tell you is that if you are not sharpening your saw and becoming more effective in every sales conversation that you're having, you're going to either find yourself losing to the competition or the status quo. And as I like to tell every client we have, status quo is actually your biggest competitor. It's not the competitor that you think it is. It's people staying put with what they already have. So strategic conversations do one of two things. They either allow you to advance or close business more effectively and efficiently, or they allow you to disqualify a prospect more quickly and effectively. And so I want to share with you a formula that I can tell you is critical to your success and accelerating growth. And it's simply this: the quality of every connection you're making, plus the quality of each sales conversation you're having, are going to equal the quantity of your sales conversions. And as simple as that sounds, effectively conducting sales conversations is where most companies that we interact with fall short. First and foremost, building know, like, and trust quickly and early in your sales process, and then enhancing the quality of every sales conversation that you're having should allow you to advance those prospects to whatever the appropriate next step is, and will ultimately determine the amount of new business that you're generating. The key, though, to all of this is having a formalized sales process. And when I say formalized, it needs to be milestone-centric and staged. And I can tell you it's literally the most important component of converting more business. If we're working with a larger organization who has salespeople, when we come in and help somebody develop their proprietary sales process, we can impact sales by more than 15% with just that. Now, what I find, and especially with solopreneurs, and please don't take offense to that because I was one for many, many years, more than a decade. And what I can tell you is that predominantly most wing it. They don't have a formalized milestone-centric sales process. And in fact, because they don't have it, oftentimes the prospect is the one leading the conversation. Okay, so key to your sales success and accelerating growth is starting with a milestone-centric sales process, and then every step along the way is about your effective execution of that process. Now, I wanted to share with you 10 keys to a quality conversation. I'm going to focus there because quickly building rapport and trust is a whole topic in itself. And I chose to focus on this today because I believe I can give you a very tactical framework to start using right away. The 10 keys to a quality conversation at a high level begin with a compelling introduction. You have to get people's attention from the moment you speak with them. And let me give you an example. I could have told you all in an introduction that I do sales training versus I help companies find and close more new business. You see the difference? So I would encourage all of you to go back and look at the introductions you even use today. And are you talking in features and benefits? Or are you talking compelling through the eyes of the person that you're speaking to? Positioning, you need to take control of every sales conversation you're having. And so a positioning statement oftentimes will sound something like this. I'm just going to demonstrate it for you ad lib here. So if it's all right with you, now imagine I'm talking to you personally, I'd like to share how I thought we might proceed today to give you the most value. Would that be all right? And you're going to say, sure. So I want to begin with a brief introduction of myself, spend just a few minutes there, certainly answer any questions you might have about our business. But I want to spend the majority of the time asking you a lot of questions about your business, your goals, and your challenges. Along the way, I'm going to sprinkle in some ideas as I have them, and I'll be happy to share those with you. And all I ask is that when we get to the end, we can mutually agree on whatever the appropriate next step would be. Would it be all right with you if we proceeded that way? That's what I mean by a positioning statement. So the beautiful thing is you can fill in the middle of that with whatever content is appropriate for that meeting. But that's how you allow yourself to keep control of that sales conversation. Know where you're at in the sales ladder. I'm going to show you what that looks like in a second here. But the key is, depending on where you're at in the sales ladder, you need to have an objective for that meeting. What's the outcome that is appropriate for the conversation you're having based on where you're at in the sales ladder? Selling is not telling. Okay, and here's another vulnerability of many people who are in a sales position or a sales conversation, and that is telling people what you have to offer, telling people what your benefits are. The key to effective sales conversations are the quality of questions that you're asking. You build interest when you ask quality questions. Second, which is a layer beneath that, is seeking to understand. Too often, when people answer questions, they speak in ambiguity. Now, what I mean by ambiguity is just something vague, like, you know, our process is good. Well, what does good mean? So we've got to listen for that. And you've got to peel back the onion in order to seek to understand where somebody is at and what they really need. And so this is all about asking more and better questions. The vulnerability I'll mention again is jumping way too quickly into your solutions before seeking to understand. Delivering your solutions is all about compelling value propositions. Value propositions are only compelling when they're through the eyes of who your prospect is, okay? Not your eyes. And we'll talk a little bit more about that. Understanding buyer motivation is how you really move somebody into desire to working with you. Buyer motivation isn't what's at the superficial level. It's really the why behind the why. And again, you're only going to get there based on the quality of questions that you're asking in conducting your sales conversation. Controlling your own emotions is critical in your sales conversations. What I mean by that is being able to actively listen and be present in a conversation. When you can identify that in a conversation, your inner voice was the loudest voice in the room, except nobody else heard it but you, I promise you, the ability to ask more and better questions is compromised. And so that's training. You've got to really actively train yourself to stay present. It's critical to keep the wall of defense down in the conversation. Understand that when people come into the front end of a conversation, emotions tend to be high, especially if you've reached out to them as opposed to them reaching out to you. But either way, people will tend to have a wall of defense up. They don't want to be sold. None of us wants to be sold. So conducting a quality conversation means that you deliberately keep the wall of defense down. Now that's a big topic in itself that I'm not going to have time to get into today, but suffice to say, the better you are at keeping the wall of defense down, the fewer objections that you're going to have to address in the course of your conversations. And then lastly, it's all about connecting to somebody's behavioral style. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with DISC. I happen to have been certified in it 2 decades ago. And what I can tell you is based on how each one of us is wired behaviorally, we will have a tendency to resonate more versus less depending on words that we're using. Some of you may be very results oriented, very task oriented, and subsequently you're going to resonate more when I choose words like that in my conversation. Some of you are going to be more on the relationship driven side, whereby that feeling of warmth and acceptance is immensely important to you. Knowing that the person you're talking to about potential services or products cares is going to be a high priority. So learning how to identify this in people and then using language that connects is very, very powerful in conducting a quality conversation that connects as opposed to disconnects. Now, I know I went through a whole lot there, and there's lots of depth to all of this, but this does give you keys to conducting an effective conversation. Now, I mentioned the sales ladder, and very quickly, if you look to the right of the screen, that's the sales ladder that I was referring to. So if you, for instance, in your business have identified either people or companies that you'd like to target, those are suspects. Somebody even calling you on the front side of that conversation is a suspect. Why do I say that? Because we don't know if they're qualified to do business or not. The next step in the sales ladder is to move them to a prospect. When somebody's a prospect, they have an interest in what you can offer them. It's not been fully vetted or qualified yet, but there's an interest. You've identified some level of need as well. To move to mutually qualified, now what you've done is you've vetted not only need, but also budget. They can afford what you do. And then obviously customer means they've accepted your price, your terms, and your offerings, and you're going to be working together. Advocate is when asked, somebody would rave about what you have to offer. But again, the key there is they're asked. And the goal for every one of us should be to create raving fans. And the difference between an advocate and a raving fan is simply, it's unprompted. Okay, so people want to talk about you and what you've done for them and how you've done it, and they don't wait to be asked for that. Now, what I meant is that every conversation you're conducting needs to hinge on where you're at in this sales ladder. Oftentimes where people get tripped up and end up sounding salesy, even though that's probably something you're quite adverse to, is because we're talking to a prospect, somebody who just has interest, and we're using sales language. We're jumping up multiple rungs on that sales ladder. When we jump too quickly into talking about our solutions, we're doing the same thing. Now, centric to how I've sold for many, many years is an acronym called AIDA. And I don't know if any of you have heard of it, but I can tell you there isn't a conversation whereby this isn't centric to how I'm conducting that. The acronym stands for attention, interest, desire, and action. Okay, so you need to get somebody's attention. Again, that should be a compelling introduction, not I offer sales training, but I help companies who want to find and close more business and accelerate their growth. Interest is, again, where somebody is a prospect. Now, the thing I want to caution you on, and maybe you all have experienced this, you can talk to somebody as a prospect and they can stay interested for a very long time without buying. In other words, it stays at interest. If you go back and look at all the potential business you haven't closed, I promise you the magic lies between interest and creating desire. The difference between interest and desire is two components: urgency and emotion. So if you are not establishing urgency to take action, to do something about the challenge they have, people will stay interested. If you haven't created emotion, emotion is going to come from people recognizing and discussing the impact their current challenge is having. And I'll show you how that fits into key questions in a moment. But again, your insight into the lack of business you've closed in the past and wonder why is oftentimes going to be the difference between moving from interest to desire or not. And then lastly, it's action, getting a commitment to take that next step. Okay, promise you every sales conversation you have should be fitting into this acronym with intention, with preparation. Here is a framework for conducting a conversation that converts, okay? And the way to look at this is the following. When you start a conversation, tension, as I like to call it, is generally high, okay? Nobody wants to be sold. Maybe they have a problem that they've got to get fixed now. There's all sorts of reasons. Maybe you called into somebody, interrupted their day, which we should be doing if we're effectively prospecting. And again, they're busy, emotion's going to be high. Your goal in building trust and rapport should be to bring tension down. Again, a big topic that I don't have time to address today, but that's what we need to be doing from a psychological perspective, is bringing tension down. Once we do that, we want to build good tension. And we do that by asking compelling questions. And I'll give you the 4 types of questions in a moment that lead to compelling. When we're asking compelling questions, we're building tension. And what do I mean there? I mean, you are leading people to a place where they desire a solution. They fully recognize the challenge they're having and aspire to resolve it. And it's at that peak where you want to provide your solution. Not when you started asking questions way back here, but as you built. Solutions are going to come in the form of value propositions. I'll explain that in a minute. And once we've done that, we want to bring tension back down by gaining commitment. Again, I want to remind you, gaining commitment should be based on where you're at in the sales ladder. So for me, for example, it is rare I would have a one-call close. Okay. Subsequently, if I'm trying to gain commitment to close to doing business in that initial conversation, I'm going to keep tension high. I'm going to likely sound salesy. Instead, I need to move to the appropriate next step, which might be another meeting, which might mean we need to incorporate another decision maker. There's all sorts of scenarios there, but you've got to be appropriate in asking for whatever the commitment is based on where you're at in the sales ladder with someone. There are 4 types of questions that fall under the compelling question category. The first begins with status questions, and this is where you're getting some scope. What is it that they're dealing with? What challenge are they trying to overcome? How did they get there? They tend to be generalized, broad questions. And by the way, no matter what type of question we're talking about, you need to really work on making sure they stay open-ended, which means they are not questions that can be answered with yes or no. Okay, so quality questions equal open-ended questions: who, what, where, when, and how. Discovery questions. This is where you start peeling back the onion. It's where you start rising tension. This is where we have to be very focused on getting to the why behind the why. Okay, centric to conducting an effective discovery question is getting to the why behind the why. Third are criteria type questions. Now, again, a reason that you could potentially be missing opportunities is by not understanding what criteria someone's going to use to make their decision. 100% of the time after you've gone through discovery, you should be asking somebody, what is it that you are going to prioritize in making your decision? That's what I mean by a criteria question. What are the steps that are going to follow in order to make your decision? So depending on your type of business, I've got clients, in one case, they need to conduct a water sample before they could go in, and they do sanitation before they could go in and make a decision. So depending on your type of business, there could be important steps that would go in the decision-making process that you also need to uncover. Those fall under criteria. And lastly, where you're going to create impact and really build emotion and move into desire is when you get someone to articulate the consequence of status quo. What happens if you do nothing? What happens if nothing changes? Very specific consequent questions, certainly related to the challenges that you've identified. After you've effectively done that, the key now is to offer your solutions in the form of unique selling propositions. Now, here's the difference between sales training and helping somebody find and close more business. Most people talk to me in that language. You know, we're stuck. We're not finding enough new business. We're finding new business. We're not closing enough of that business. Or it's staying stuck in our sales process. Those are words that people I work with tend to use. Okay. So when you're creating, or I should say, when you're delivering sales solutions or solutions that they need, you need to pay attention to the words they're using. Value propositions should not be your jargon. They need to be the words they are using in how they describe the challenge and the aspirations that they have for their business. And so here's the key to conducting a strategic conversation that converts. And again, I apologize for such a quick overview there, but suffice to say, what you do to create a strategic conversation is you reverse engineer each value proposition into the questions that you need to be asking. And I gave you the 4 types of questions. Okay. So for example, let me show you how this works. If I know a key value proposition in my business is somebody needs to find more opportunities, I'm going to work backwards to be in a position to deliver that value proposition. So here's what this looks like. If I suspect, Ryan, that you're looking for more prospects, I don't know yet because we haven't gotten into full-blown discovery. But what I could start with as a status question is the following. How important is it to you right now to find more new business? How are you going about that? What's working? What's not working? You follow me? And I'm going to go deeper into those questions, at which point it may or may not be relevant for me to then say, Ryan, would there be some value in learning more about how I help companies like yours find more new opportunities? At that point, it should be a slam dunk to get a yes out of somebody. So what I'd encourage you all to do is to sit down and write for yourself, when you think about your ideal target market, your ideal client, what are the, say, 3 to 5 compelling value propositions that your ideal client always says yes to? What are they? And again, get out of your jargon. Then what I'd like you to do is go back to this framework. What are the status questions you need to ask that are going to lead to each one of those value propositions? What are the discovery questions you should be asking? Criteria, and then of course, impact. By the way, impact questions are oftentimes very simple. I could ask somebody appropriately, tell me what that means. How so? Those are all getting to impact. Okay, so they are not, oftentimes they're going to be very spontaneous because you're really listening and wanting to understand how whatever they're telling you is impacting the business or themselves. So the key again to a strategic conversation that converts is delivering 3 to 5 value propositions that are compelling to your prospect, and you've reverse engineered the questions you are specifically asking in that conversation to be positioned to deliver those. And that takes some preparation. I would hope, if there's nothing else that lands with you today, that what does land is that winging it in important sales conversation should be days gone by. I've been in sales my whole life. I've been teaching what I teach for 22 years, and I can tell you, I never wing a sales conversation, ever. So the idea is you are strategically leading the horse to water. Somebody saying yes to you, whether it's advancing to the next conversation. So a closing question could appropriately be, based on what we've discussed today, Catherine, I'm proposing that we meet again in the next week. How does that sound? That's a closing question, not for the business, for the next step. We could have advanced to a place, however, where I say instead, Catherine, based on everything we've said and what I've heard in that, you need X, Y, and Z. And here's how I've suggested we can help with that. I'm proposing blank. Now I'm closing on the business. The key is when you have been effective in leading the horse to water, you don't have to ask for the business. They ask you, how do we get started? How soon can we get started? What's it going to look like to start this process? Okay, but recognize, very importantly, asking for the appropriate commitment has to be based on where you're at in your sales process, analogous to that sales ladder. So I'm going to pause here and open it up for questions, because I know I went very quickly and stayed pretty high level on most things, but I'm happy to take any very specific questions you might have for your business.
So if I may, that was excellent, by the way. Thank you so much. I wanted to make sure that I understood correctly. If a person that is a potential prospect for me is saying certain words that I need to really focus on in order to ask my questions in regards to your mentioning reverse engineering questions. I'm sorry if I didn't actually put that together correctly, but my point is that if they're telling me certain things while I'm listening to pick up on what their needs are in order for me to address them, I need to make sure that I use the same words that they've used with me in order to ask them the questions that will help me strategically lead them to addressing.
So, yeah, so the words you're listening for that they use should be how you frame up your solutions, your value propositions. Okay. Now, all of you should be very clear on what those are. Like I say, ideally 3 to 5. What I mean by reverse engineering is that in your planning, if you start with what you perceive, just knowing who the individual is you're going to talk to, or if you're selling B2B, what that business looks like, what they do, those type of things, you should be able to list what those value propositions you expect to be compelling are, and now appropriately plan each of those categories of questions that I gave you. That's how you lead the horse to water.
Thank you.
See, most people in a selling conversation, they'll ask questions like, you know, tell me about your business. Or they'll ask a question that has no relevance to leading to the end result you want. They're just questions. So being very strategic about the questions you're asking and the time you have, because most of us are lucky to get an hour with somebody these days, especially in a discovery call. You have to be very strategic in the questions you're asking, because they ultimately need to lead to the commitment you want at the end of that conversation.
Yes, Jennifer, and that's where my next question lies. So in that case, because let's say you just randomly run into someone that is a potential future prospect for you. So I just want to make sure, do you strategically plan that after the first meeting and then follow up, and that's where you implement that? Or do you simply already have that set up in general to address?
Set up in general.
Okay, that's what I thought. Thank you.
Yeah, because, you know, typically you're going to be dealing with whoever that is a target prospect, right? It's not random. And so you should already have a good sense of who buys from you and why they buy. Those end up being those value propositions that you want to prepare for in the type of questions you're asking.
Makes sense. Yes.
I can tell you historically, if I have positioned between those 3 and 5 value propositions throughout a conversation, because they don't all happen at once. Questions I'm asking are to lead to value proposition number 1. Maybe they don't land. Now I've got to move to the second set of questions, right? But when I deliver 3 to 5 value propositions in a conversation, I can tell you the conversion rate is off the charts high. It's almost 100%, unless my questions have disqualified someone. Because you're selling value now through the eyes of somebody else.
Thank you. Very enlightening.
I have a question. So it's not super specific, but one of the questions that some people ask in sales calls is, what's your budget? And some people absolutely hate that question, and other people say it's a necessity to be asking that. Can you give me a little bit of feedback on what you think about that?
Yeah, so I want you guys to imagine a baseball diamond right now. Let me give this for context. At first base, we have a suspect. At second base, we have a prospect. At third base, we have a shopper. And then home, we've closed the business. Does that make sense? All right. If you are just rounding first base and asking somebody what's your budget, that's not good timing. Okay, it's jumping ahead on the sales ladder. However, when you're close to second base and looking to start qualifying, now is the time to start talking about what does a potential budget look like. Now, Matt, in your business, you can fly under the radar a little bit with that. And I'll tell you how I did it in the early years of my business. I didn't have to flat out say what's your budget for a business coach, because I can tell you in 1990 nobody knew what a business coach was, but that's what my business did. And so what I would always ask is, tell me, what are you currently spending in marketing right now?
Okay. Yeah.
And I'll tell you something I found. If somebody was spending $1,000 or more, they had budget. How did I know that? Because most often that $1,000 was going into a big black hole. They weren't getting ROI on it.
Got it. Yeah.
So you can also fly under the radar. I will tell you this, if the whole topic of uncovering where somebody's budget is uncomfortable to you, that is a deeply rooted belief system at play, and it's common. And what I'll just tell you is that to be effective in advancing opportunities or disqualifying them before you invest too much time requires you get comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Okay.
So just think in terms of the baseball diamond like I gave you, and think like this. I need to be on second base, and then I need to start uncovering budget.
All right. Awesome. Thank you. That's a great answer.
Anybody else?
Jennifer, I have a question.
Mhm.
So how do you, if you make it into the process and then discover that person you're talking to is not a good fit, what's the best strategy for making sure that you're not spending too much time in a meeting where it's not a good fit, but also not coming off as rude or impolite to the person you're meeting with?
So if you do the positioning statement I gave you, and remember, the last thing I said in a positioning statement is that all I'm asking is that when we come to the end of this meeting, we mutually agree on what the appropriate next step should be. Okay? 100% of the time I say that. Well, if I've identified, Ryan, that you aren't a good fit for what I have to offer, right? I'm doing us both a disservice by continuing the meeting. So what I'm going to do at that point in time is I'm going to refer back to that statement. And it's going to sound something like this. You know, Ryan, I know we're only 30 minutes into our call, but I just want to say this. Based on what I've heard today, it doesn't sound like it makes sense for us to move forward. And I might give you the reason why. Now, based on what I have heard, I might have somebody I can refer you to, right? So I don't specialize in succession planning, and it sounds like that's a bigger priority for you right now. I do know of a succession planning coach that I would be happy to refer you to. Would that be all right? So I always like to end when I've disqualified somebody by being resourceful for them, a resource.
That makes a ton of sense. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Anything else?
Does anyone have any other questions for Jennifer? All right. Well, then let's give Jennifer a hand for her presentation today.
All right.
And Jennifer, would you like to close with how folks can get a hold of you if anyone wants to learn more or would like to set a follow-up meeting?
Sure. I'm best reached at Jennifer at AS as in Sam, LII, N as in Nancy, C.com.
Awesome. Well, excellent. So everyone, thank you very much for attending today's meeting. A couple of quick upcoming events I'd like to share. Next week on our meeting, our speaker is going to be Brittany Eisenman from Fort Wayne, Indiana, and she's going to talk about how employee engagement pays you. And then the following week, the 16th, our speaker will be Tate Linden, who is in Maryland, and he's going to talk about the integrity lens. So those are our next couple of speakers coming up here. Also, if you are here in Central Indiana, don't forget Friday is our Race to Support Small Business event. That is now at Launch Fishers, which is up off of 116th Street and Interstate 69. So everyone, thank you again for attending. Have a wonderful week, and we'll see you next time.